Hello and welcome, this is AgentXP and welcome back to part 2 of my traps and triggers tutorial. So in this episode we are going to look at how to use next gen triggers to trigger the same things that we triggered in the previous tutorial. So if you haven't seen the previous tutorial, it might be worth going and checking that out quickly. I will give a link to the previous video in the description. So last time we configured a boulder trap, a spike pit trap and a fire trap, and we also set up a simple camera hint on the boulder slope. So today we are going to be transferring the setups of those to the TRNG scripting method. Now this may sound scary, but scripting isn't as hard as you might think. The editor generates all the scripts for you, you just have to copy them into the right place and then trigger them. So next I'm going to show you how to set up these triggers using the next generation method, and especially for cameras this is a lot more reliable than using the standard method, but it also allows you to stack special trigger types. So what we're going to want to do first is we're going to want to set up a trigger for the rolling ball, and we're going to do this by clicking on the rolling ball and selecting the trigger window, and then what we want to do is scroll to action and then scroll down on the timer parameter option and scroll down the list to the trigger type triggers, and you'll see here a list of trigger options, and what we want is movable and activate object with timer value. If you select this, what this gives you is an action trigger for the rolling ball. Now you could just place this in the level if you wanted to and it would work exactly like a standard trigger. So you could put a magenta trigger tile, and when Lara steps on that it would trigger the boulder the same as the traditional type of trigger. But what is special about this type of trigger is that we have the option at the bottom of the screen to export the script trigger. So if we click on that, what that's going to do is it's going to generate a notepad file looking a little bit like this, and you may look at this and think, oh no, what is this talking about? So what this basically is telling you is what the trigger does. If we look here, it's an action trigger. It is triggering a rolling ball with this ID in this sector of the room. It's a movable trigger. It's got 0 in the timer field, so there's no delay on it. And it says here the values to add in the script command are, and you get this little string of numbers. This little string of numbers is the only thing that you're going to need to put in your script. Everything else is basically description. So you need to copy this string of numbers. Make sure you get the whole string, don't leave anything off. If we open up our next gen center, we need to find the level entry for the level that we're using, and in this case I'm using a level called Moors, and I have very little in my level script currently. I just have a few custom things that I have put in there myself. So what you need to do is include something called a trigger group command, and what this basically is trigger group equals. So you're going to want to write this, and the trigger has a capital T, the group has a capital G. So before you copy and paste in your values, what you're going to want to do is, after you've written the equal symbol, you're going to want to press F1, and this will give you the next free available trigger group number. And this is 1, as this is the first trigger group that we are using in this level. Then we're going to want to put a comma after the number and then a space, and then we can copy in the values that we got from the notepad document. Assuming that we want this trigger group to activate more than one thing, what we're going to want to do next is put in a comma, and then we can go back to our level editor. Now that we triggered the boulder, the next thing we want to configure is the music track. So if we select our trigger menu, we want to select the object drop down and find ourselves the flip effect tab. And then we want to scroll down on the object to trigger menu, and we want to find sound. And what we want is play CD track in E-Way on channel 2, as this selects the foreground track. Now in TRNG you can have 2 music tracks playing concurrently, so channel 1 is the channel that you want your background track to play on, so that's for your background ambience, so for example your cave or wind sound effects, etc. And in channel 2 you want your foreground music to play. So to select channel 2, and we can then select the music track that we want. So select audio track number 2 because that is the audio track we want, and we want to select single playback as we don't want the music track looping endlessly, we just want it to play once. So we've configured this trigger, and once again you could just place a trigger for this in the level if you wanted to, using the magenta trigger option. But what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to click on export script trigger. This is going to generate us another notepad file, and what we're going to want to do is take this value at the end once again and select copy, and then we're going to want to paste this into our NextGen Center. So once again we are in NextGen Center and we can paste in the value. So what we're doing here is we're adding commands to our trigger group, and after this one I'm going to put in another comma and another space as we're not quite done yet. So coming back to the level editor, what we now want to do is trigger the cameras. And we're going to select first of all the camera target. You should always trigger the camera target first. I'm not entirely sure why, but it just works better this way. So we select our camera target, and if we want to trigger this, we come to the object tab and we find the action trigger. And then we scroll down and look for the triggers. And here we are going to want to select the target trigger. So trigger, target, set movable as target for camera or fixed camera. Select this, and then we do the export script trigger option again. Once again, this will give us the notepad file, and you probably know the drill by now. We select the values at the end and we copy and paste those. So open up NextGen Center and copy in those values, put another comma, put a space, and then we go back to the level editor. So we're back in the level editor, and now we finally need to put a trigger for our camera. So click on the camera to select it, select the trigger window once again, and what we want to do is select the what trigger at the top, and we want to go to action, and then we can scroll down and find the trigger, and find at the top there is a trigger camera, activate camera or fixed camera with a timer value. So select that, and we're going to select a timer value of 4 seconds, and that is a trigger for our camera. So we once again want to go to export script trigger. Once again, this will give us our notepad file. We want to copy the value at the end, and once again, you know the drill. We're going to open up our NextGen Center, and we are going to copy in that value. So that is our trigger group. So we've now finished setting up our trigger group. So what we want to do is close all those windows, and now we only need one trigger in the level, and that will activate all of our triggers. So what we want to do in order to trigger our trigger group is just select a tile, open up your trigger menu, and you want to scroll down and find flip effect. Then you need to select the object to trigger drop down, scroll down your list and find the trigger group section. So what we want to do is select the trigger group, perform trigger group from script in E-Way. So that is the option you want, and when it says extra at the bottom, you want to select single performing because you only want the trigger group to be activated once. And on the timer parameter, we can select this drop down and we can choose which number trigger group we are activating. Now you have a choice of up to 255, and we are triggering the first of these. So set it to trigger group 1 and select one shot and go OK. And then we finally place a conventional magenta trigger on that tile. And what that trigger now does is it activates everything in your trigger group. So you can see that I now have 4 things activated with a single trigger. So we've successfully configured our trigger, and what we need to do in order to finally activate this is click Save in NextGen Center and then click Build. If you don't click Build, then your trigger will not work, so you do have to build the script first. But if we come back to our level here and we look at this trigger group, if something were to go wrong with this trigger group, or we wanted to add something to it in the future, then this trigger group is, well, rather lacking in description, and it's quite hard to read. If we want to know what one of these commands does, we can click copy and go into our level editor, and we can reverse engineer this, so we can find out what each of these values does. So if you want to find out what the value does, you copy and paste it, and you can go to your trigger window and click on Find Trigger Number, and you can copy in your value and click OK. It will then bring up the relevant trigger information in the window, so it will tell you what the trigger is and it will set everything up. So if you want to change something, for example, if you want the camera timer to be a bit longer, you can adjust it to 5 seconds and you can re-export the trigger. This will give you another notepad value, and you can copy this, and then we can go back to NextGen Center and we can copy in the new value, and that will be fine. But what we might want to do is add some description to our triggers, and you can do this. So the way that we do this is we put a comment, and if you want to make a comment in your script, what you do is put in the semicolon symbol, and then you can write anything you want. So you can write boulder trigger, and that explains what your trigger group is. So you can put it above or you can put it below, and you have a description of your trigger, and you might want to put in some symbols so it's a bit more obvious, and that will label your trigger. But if you want to go even further than that, you can explain every single line of your trigger, and it really depends what you find easier to understand. If your trigger group is getting rather long, at the moment we're only 4 values, but if you get much longer than that, it becomes rather hard to read it and refer to it. So what you can do is put in a greater than symbol, and you can then press enter, and you can put your next value on a new line. And if you press your tab key, you can indent your next command to a new line. And you can do this for every single line if you wish. So you can put each of your commands on a new line and put the greater than symbol and press enter, and then indent your values onto a new line. And then you can label each one if you wish. So put in a semicolon and label each line. So that's the boulder. Try and get them all to line up nicely. This one is the music. Oops. This one is the target. And this one is the camera. So it's really up to you how you want to do this, but that is a way that you can arrange your trigger groups to make them a bit easier to read, and it's really up to you how you want to do this. So once again, we want to click Save and we want to click on Build. And the editor is happy with that. It didn't throw up any errors. If you forget to put in one of these greater than symbols, or you forget to put in a semicolon, it will most likely throw up an error, so you should know whether you've done it correctly or not. So now we're all done configuring that trigger group. We have ourselves a working boulder slope. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a slightly less tedious way of triggering a lot of objects. We could trigger these spikes using a trigger group, as I just demonstrated, but if you're only triggering objects like these, then there is a slightly more effective way of doing that. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to delete all of these standard triggers like so. So just select all of them, continue pressing delete, and then we're done. So what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to configure an item group, and this will allow you to simply input the IDs of each of the item and then trigger all of them with one item group trigger, and the only thing you need for this is the IDs of all the objects that you're wanting to trigger. So for an item group, once again, we want to come to the script for our level, and what we want to do is similar to what we did with the trigger group. We want to input the command item group. So I've input the command item group in the script here, and after the little equal sign we're going to want to press F1. And this will give us the next available item group number, and in this case it's 1 because we don't have any more item groups in the level. So after we've pressed F1 and we've got our number, we can put in a comma. And then what we want to do is get all the values of our items from the level. So this basically involves referring back and forth between your room editor and your next gen center. And we have 190, we have 193, we have 196, we have 197, 194, 191, 192, 195 and 198. So basically all the numbers between 190 and 198. So basically all the numbers between 190 and 198. So if we open up our next gen center once again, we can then input all of these numbers. So we can put 190, comma, 191, comma, 192, comma, 193, comma, 194, comma, 195, comma, 196, comma, 197, and 198. You get the idea. And we have a list of item IDs, and that will trigger all of our spikes. Similar to the trigger group, you might want to label this, so I am going to put in a semicolon and I'm going to put spike trigger. Whoops, can't type. Spike triggers. And then we're going to just label that so it's easy to see. So spike triggers, item group 1. So next we want to come back to the level editor and we can set a trigger for our item group. And in order to do this we want to select the trigger type menu and choose flip effect, and object trigger, drop down, and we want to find item group in the list. So we want to select item group, activate item group with eTimer value, and we can then choose our item group number, and in this case it's item group 1, and we don't want a timer on it so we're going to leave that blank. And then we want to place our conventional trigger in the level, and this will trigger all the spikes. Now, assuming you wanted this to trigger if Lara stepped on the spikes, we could change this trigger type to pad if we wanted. And a pad type trigger means that it only activates if Lara's feet actually touch the tile. So this would only activate if Lara actually fell into the pit. But that's just an example. In this case, I actually want Lara to trigger the spikes when she jumps over the pit to give the player a bit of a fright. So we're going to leave that as a normal trigger type. We're going to go OK, and we are going to place our magenta trigger. So that is one trigger triggering all of these spikes. That's a lot simpler. So next I'm going to trigger these flames using the next gen method also. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete the standard triggers I have for the flame emitters. I'm also going to delete the anti-triggers, as we're going to anti-trigger these using the next gen method. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use another item group trigger for these flames. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another item group trigger for these flames. So what we need to do is note down the IDs of the flames. So we have 212 and we have 211. So I'm going to open up Next Gen Center once again, and we are going to copy and paste the item group command. Paste that in again, press F1, and it will give me 2 as the next available number, and we want 211 and 212 as the values. And we can always label this one as flame, oops, that's the wrong symbol, there we go, flame emitters. And you might want to be a bit more descriptive than that, because you might have a few of these triggers, but for now I only have the one, so I'm just going to say flame emitters. And we have our IDs, and that is an item group which will trigger both of those flames. So now I have an item group that will trigger both of the flames, and I am going to have this activate when Lara steps on this section. So once again we're going to drop down and we're going to find flip effect. We're going to scroll down and we're going to find item group, activate, and we're going to choose item group 2 this time. Okay, and we can set that trigger to those set of tiles. Now, one small side note, and it is worth noting this, there is a bug with these next gen triggers. If you're triggering a music track and you have a trigger covering multiple tiles, then Lara will trigger the music track every time she touches one of these tiles. The one-shot feature does not seem to work for these next-gen triggers, especially where music tracks are concerned. There may be other things as well, but it's more obvious when it comes to music tracks. So if you're triggering a music track with one of these triggers, then try and place the trigger on one tile only, as the one-shot setting does not apply to multiple tiles. But we should be okay for these flame emitters, because once they're turned on, they won't be turned back off even if Lara crosses the multiple tiles. So we have set our trigger for our item group, and all the flames will be turned on when Lara steps on these tiles. So in order to untrigger the flames, what we're going to want to do is to untrigger the item group. In order to do this, we want to select the trigger window, and once again we want to select flip effect, and we can come down and scroll to item group. If we find item group in the list, we want to select item group and untrigger item group, and we choose the item group we want to untrigger, and we select OK, and we place our trigger on the map. So that will untrigger all the items that were triggered using the item group. So that is how you configure trigger groups and item groups, and we can now go and test this in game, and you can see the results. So that's it for part 2. In this episode I have showed you how to make next gen versions of the triggers that we set up in part 1. So we have set up a trigger group for a boulder trap, we have set up an item group for a spike trap, and we've also set up an item group for triggering and anti-triggering a flame emitter stack as well. So I hope you enjoyed. If you found this useful, please do consider liking and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do hit the notification bell so that you're notified when I upload future episodes. This is Agent XP. Thank you for watching. TTFN.